Okay, boys and girls, for the recording, welcome to the third lecture. Shall I cough? I don't know. Shall I get my cough? No, I was thinking.
Not cock.
No, really, to start today's lecture, I am not gonna. It's done up. I was here earlier, walking around, hopefully without any fleshy parts revealed. But I learned the word, thank you, Brigidia today. I had my flies undone, unconsciously revealing too much of myself for today's lecture, which incidentally is all about pee. You're in luck. I thought that was right. Look, one pun for the lecture today. It's going to be comparatively short. Oh my God, only 45 minutes. Gosh, because we've got Heather Lyon's inauguration, right here at 7. Okay, you look strangely unexcited, Heather. Okay. Anyway, I'm excited. So with my private parts very much definitely nestled within my clothes, we will start today with a little story, and it's a true story. I was preparing for today's lecture, and in my moist, humid, very Portuguese house built in 1957, and I went to the toilet to conduct further research on urine, and I was not completing the business. I hadn't even started the task. I was busy looking at the bus timetable to get to Zaratan, and I heard a creaking above my head, a noise, a little crackle, a little noise of something happening, and then I had to go. Trousers up, jumped out of the bathroom, and as I can show you the photos, the roof collapsed quite literally on top of me. I had dust in my nose, and what brilliant metaphor to start with today's piss superstition. Superstition, as I had just looked up, the history of this word is to be above standing. No one really knows quite how above standing turns into our modern idea of pursuing irrational, mythical ideas of religion, as superstition is, or of fate or fortune. But that's the original meaning. Super and ste is kind of superstition, and it's an interesting relation with the word substance, which is literally the opposite, quite the opposite. Understand is the substance, and superstition is the opposite. I'd explain it really, really badly, but I thought it was interesting that of all days, this is what happens. And Zé of Zaratan told me that, well, you're like the people of Brittany. They believed the sky would collapse on top of them. So as hopefully these lectures might be a sense of inverting ideas or collapsing structures or deconstruction, I'll move on to what I think the piss superstition is. The piss superstition is a mystical joke, quite like in November 1997 when Duchamp's fountain, the urinal, sells for $17 million. Or is it 1.7 million? But it was a lot of dollars, something like $17 million. God bless Sotheby's for elevating a joke originally. In my opinion, Duchamp's urinal was always a joke, always poking fun at the art world, and yet the joke is kind of on Duchamp as the money is not going to him. And I would like to bring us all into the room, into the space, into this necessary transitional part of the Zaratan complex, the courtyard, the open space, a clean space of diverging nutrients and minerals. We are very much in the kidneys of Lisbon, in the sense that we're here not to just listen to my stupid stories or ideas, but also to sort of process what we've sort of pumped through our heads before, and then eventually to enjoy the taste of our own ideas, the savouring, the aroma of our own sort of ideas, and so to speak, abstract urine. So I'm eventually going to propose that we drink each other's urine, but I'll tell you how we're going to get there a bit later. To start today, I think we'll just make a little note for the god of these lectures, the hero from the 1940s, 50s Paris, our friend Georges Bataille. Georges Bataille sitting over there. He's actually got his own camera today, which is a nice little tribute. He helps build this idea of what he called base materialism, I'd like to call it instead maybe the subreal. And just a quick thing, if someone could maybe, if that noise just in the next room could maybe not happen, that would be great. Thank you very, very much. Sorry, a bit sensitive to sound. So Bataille, base materialism or subrealism, basically the idea of getting the lower parts, the depths of ourselves, and elevating them into a kind of new mysticism, or maybe a very, very old mysticism which we've lost, forgotten, and we're going to recover. So the ideas of Bataille and of these lectures are very much historical. Excellent. Good job. So Bataille wrote two things which we're going to talk about today. First of all is the Pineal Eye essay, and the second is an unpublished book called Absence of Myth. I think actually, given we're lacking a little bit of time, I think we will just skip over one or two of the quotes and just focus on the idea of urine, or potentially urine, but any kind of emerging of fluid from a man's penis, or a penis, I should say. The intolerable cry of cocks. That's a great idea for ejaculation or urination. The intolerable cry of cocks. The idea that this kind of relief or ecstasy of dejecta is somehow intolerable, pleasure being somehow impossible to perceive. The intolerable cry of cocks has a solar significance because of the pride and feeling of triumph of the man perceiving his own dejecta under the open sky. What bigger pleasure is there than pissing in the wind, of flooding the fields with your own urine, connecting your nitrogen to that of the world? You're somehow part of the universe, and in a sense drinking your own urine, you're this own Ouroboros, connecting yourselves to the minerals. Your minerals are that of the earth, and the earth is yours, possibly. In the same way, during the night, an immense troubled love, sweet as a young girl's spasm, abandons and throws itself into a giant universe with the intimate feeling of having urinated the stars. That's from the Pineal Eye, from Visions of Excess, which is here, which you should definitely have a look at later on. And very quickly moving on to an essay of his called The Absence of Myth, and the Absence of God, I should say. The collection is called Absence of Myth. This is where we're going to really focus on today, in the political ramifications of pissing and drinking our own urine. So, the absence of God is no longer a closure. It is the opening up to the infinite. The absence of God is greater and more divine than God. So, potentially the idea is that monks, mystics, nuns are more atheistic than so-called common people, or people outside of the monasteries and convents. Why could you suggest that a monk and a nun is more of an atheist than, say, an everyday person? Potentially because they've thought for longer what exactly a kind of God they're worshipping, rejecting most of the common ideas of what God is, and then embracing a even potentially more nihilistic and threadbare or sort of bare God, minimal God. The absence of God is no longer a closure, it is the opening up to the infinite. So atheism in itself is a release into this greater idea of mysticism. The absence of God is greater and more divine than God, and so the idea is that to free ourselves from what God means, we would have to return to our base. The disgust of everyday life, the smell of our own steaming urine. So to move on quickly, we'll deal with a sort of poet of piss in many ways, the Irish writer, of course, James Joyce, whose Ulysses mentions piss, I think contains the word piss about 7 times. Admittedly, it's quite a big book. But he seems to elevate piss into its own, possibly a fetish, which implies maybe a kind of a minimal valuing of something, but I think it's something a little bit more than this. From Ulysses, I can't tell you which chapter, James Joyce talks or writes of the smells of men, spat on sawdust, sweetish, warmish cigarette smoke, the reek of plugs, spilt beer, men's beery piss, the stale of ferment, the idea that urine is a kind of mineral-rich fluid, full of potential. That brings me a little bit closer to the modern trend, of which reportedly 3 million Chinese people are doing regularly, which is drinking their own urine. Why they do this is quite curious. I don't literally suggest we drink our own ferment, the stale, beery piss, as James Joyce says, but it's interesting what draws people to doing this thing. In one other moment in Ulysses, Joyce writes that a woman bent forward, her feet apart, pisses cowily. It's not a word really in English. To make an adverb from cow, the woman is pissing as a cow, cowily. That was very, very beautiful. And in I think one of the early chapters, classic scene where Leopold Bloom, the hero of Ulysses, is preparing breakfast. Mr. Leopold Bloom ate with relish the inner organs of beasts and fowls. He liked thick giblet soup, nutty gizzards, a stuffed roast heart, liver slices fried with crust crumbs, fried hencods roes. Most of all, he liked grilled mutton kidneys, which gave to his palate a fine tang of faintly scented urine. A fine tang of faintly scented urine. So, why am I myself fetishizing piss, urine? Well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, it brings us down to earth. It brings a little bit of humility to a scenario of which we're in, which is quite typically associated with either the academe, universities, not known to be the most humble of places, or even places like seminars, seminaries as well. The monks are trained, seminars, of course, where you go and talk, which, incidentally, seminars comes from the word semen, seed, interesting. And it leads me to the problem of what the lack of words for what this thing is. I haven't had so much interaction, or little interaction today, but I'm determined to make these lectures into something else that isn't quite a lecture, more of a reading group, more of a sharing of ideas. Whenever you look up words for a public speech, you're either driven towards the university language, so seminars, lectures, readings, or you're led to religious terminology, sermons, and so on. So we could maybe invent a new word. I would love this to be, and I mean this in all seriousness, and kind of an orgy. And I mean that maybe if we can try to get that word orgy and clean it a little bit, because of course we think of sexual group sex basically, but an orgy really comes from the word work. I can't tell you which Greek word it is, but orgy in the sense that this is a kind of a laboratory working together, us sort of generating the kidneys, as it were, a new fluid, a new substance for spiritual enlightenment. So, we will have a break in a few minutes where I will encourage you all to, yes, of course, use the toilet, having your own moment of reflection privately, and I will encourage you to do that as Isabel, in fact, reveals what's going on. So, Isabel, if you can do me a favour and kindly reveal the hidden gift, encouraging for our own fluidity. We are, above all, afraid of dryness. And that's why, a little Britain for you, we're going to drink some perfect tea that I made. It's a wonderful little substance. It's my own chai. And please help yourselves. I'm leaving it there. Don't be shy. Come and collect a little bit of tea. And we'll have a very quick break of just about 3-4 minutes to find our own seclusion in the house of the bath, Casa del Bagno, or the toilet. In fact, I think there's a poster still in the toilet now. I can't recall it word for word. Go and find it for yourself. It's quite beautiful, and it's all about this solitude of your own warmth and your own fluids and your own dark room, so to speak. And then we'll return to our ecstatic orgy in about 5 minutes. Thanks, boys and girls. sometimes I just go to the bathroom to breathe. If you go to the toilet, which you should do, it's great there, and the roof doesn't collapse, amazingly. There's a poster there. Does anyone can
It's
say?
from Samuel Walsh, an amazing New Zealand artist, and the roof will not collapse because it's a fake roof.
Oh, it is right, just like
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that one as well.
There are two things. You can see here. This is the roof. This is the in-between space. It's a new fake roof.
Oh, so it's okay. It's a fake roof.
It will not fall down.
Okay.
It already had fallen.
I mean, it's one thing for the Earth to quake, but for something above you, that's really quite horrible. Yeah. Anyway, there is more tea. Please indulge. I will leave it here. In fact, I'll leave it over here because I know what you're like. Don't be shy. There's my tea. So with all these nights, sometimes I just go to the bathroom to breathe. Place of rest. In fact, what is it that we're breathing? What is it that we're sniffing? This glorious magical substance, our own urine, which understandably humans either love or hate depending on time and place. I'll bring you to 17th century England, and an author who wrote about urine being so highly valued by fullers. Fullers were people who processed wool, so that to make wool clean and organise the minuscule threads of wool. Wool, incidentally, being the material, the currency of our Britain's Industrial Revolution, and what fed the engines of the Industrial Revolution. I'm overstating this, but it was urine. It really was urine. From a delightfully titled book by Sally Magnuson called The Life of Pee, the story of how urine got everywhere. I'm going to read to you about urine and value, because in 17th century, 17th and 18th century England, it was the urine of Methodists, of particular Christians who didn't drink, that was really, really highly valued because their urine was less acidic than the rest of the highly intoxicated Brits. It certainly paid to be a Methodist in parts of rural Wales. Not only was heaven within your grasp, so was a premium rate income from your pee. The man running the local fulling mill, or pandy in Welsh, needed large quantities of urine to clean the cloth sent there by local weavers. So he brought it in, driving his horse and cart around the houses of his regular customers every day, collecting their pails or their barrels of household urine, emptying them into a cask on the wagon and handling over payment. Compare this remarkable series where the abstemious, non-drinking Methodist urine was acquired and even paid for by the fullers, by the people who processed wool, to contemporary Germany, where if you go and stay or couch surf or whatever, you may see a poster by the toilet saying Sitzpinkeln. I don't know if anyone's seen this or experienced the peculiarities of urinating in Germany, but there's been a big movement, I think from the early 2000s, I'm not sure. Sitzpinkeln, it literally means sit peeing, sitting while you pee, and it's applied to, of course, understandably, to men. Women we don't need to worry about there, but the idea that men should be sitting down while they go to the toilet, while they piss, is a way of reclaiming some certain dignities for cleaners. Cleaners, predominantly in Germany, are women, and why should they have to exquisite conspiracy theories there. But I think we can find a middle point between kind of new agey, dubious therapies, maybe a cry for help in a world where we feel so lost, we turn to our own urine in a sort of feeling of self-empowerment, as embarrassing as that seems. We move on, I would say, to a higher elevation, brought to us, you could say, by a prayer, which is said by Orthodox Jews when they go to the toilet. This prayer, I believe, comes from the Talmud, and there are various translations. I'll just read one of them. Blessed is God. So, excuse me, this is a prayer that many Orthodox Jews would say after relieving themselves, after pointing Percy at the porcelain, after spending a penny, as my mum would say, spending a penny. Beautiful euphemism. Blessed is God, who has formed the human body in wisdom and created many orifices and cavities. It is obvious and known before you, that you with a capital Y indicating God, it is obvious and known before you that if one of them were to be opened or closed incorrectly, it would be impossible to survive and stand before you at all. Blessed is God who heals all flesh and does wonders. A crucial part, I believe, and what was made very emphatic to me by a rabbi I used to know. He said to me, we're thanking God because we are open, fleshy beings, and we sometimes close. We are essentially donuts. If you look, not just at mine, but consider your own gastrointestinal tract, it starts here. Digestion, in a sense, starts here, so to speak. Your saliva contains chemicals to process food already, and it ends, of course, down there. And it's thanks to, according to the Talmud, the beautiful phenomenon of the human sphincter. The sphincter is a kind of a philosophical ideal. It can shut when it needs, it opens when it needs to. The problems of childbirth, particularly human problem, are arguably a problem of fear caused by the male-dominated medical industry, who are the stars of the show in childbirth. The women is secondary. The doctor comes in and saves everything and cures, and it's all sterile. Where in fact, of course, it's the women's need who comes first. Why we should stop the women being horizontal and make them vertical when they give birth, and also to relax the sphincter, the vaginal sphincter. The vaginal sphincter contains muscles which are incredibly flexible, beyond anything that man or humans can make. And it's known that when women have helpers when they give birth, that they relax, the vaginal tissue releases, and it's a less painful, less problematic birth. So we can thank God that we can actually release when we need and close when we need. This is problematic, of course, in two senses when we are presented with fear. Fear is a curious element in the urinary process. Speaking as a man, yes, sometimes it is difficult to go in public. There's some really funny names which we call this in Britain. Stage fright, bladder shame. But the idea, if you're surrounded with a group of other people, it's really difficult to go, even though you really need to go. So clearly the body rules the day in this sense. But fear does the opposite. We know that we have phrases, of course, I was so scared I peed myself. And this genuinely happens. It's to do, as I understand it, with overridings in the brain of, I'm not sure, the limbic system and this or that. But the idea is the fear locks down processes and releases others in your brain, and people, of course, piss themselves. So there's a lot of British slang as well to do with pissing and urine and fear and so on. So, by the way, more tea over there. If you're thirsty, please do help yourself. Thank you. So, good to see you as well. Hello. So if you just give me a moment, I'll just collect my thoughts. So I'm going to bring it to the symbolic level, which is where I think we need to rest on the idea. I feel, as Bataille wrote about the absence of myth, and our own absence of myth in terms of our reluctance to talk about spirituality, and the fact that that word myth itself is often used as a pejorative, as a negative term. Myth is something that we can reclaim. I'm going to presume most of us are on the left side of things, on the left wing. Myth is something I think we can talk about in political terms and transform it into a kind of things that we all can leak readily around the city, feeding the ecosystem with our own sort of radical solutions to political problems at the moment. And so myth is the urine, myth is the substance, and we can all drink our own myths and spread it around the globe. What do I mean? What am I actually trying to say, though? Well, I'll bring it back to the idea that myth is something that maybe we've forgotten in our Enlightenment and rationalist life, and in fact something that populists and the right wing are really, really good at using. I'm going to, again, this is a really quotey lecture today, but I'm going to quote from a writer called James Meek, who wrote a book called Dreams of Leaving and Remaining, which is about Brexit. It came out last year. And he claims that the right have stolen myth and actually have been the better ones that are not hesitant to use stories in generating political energy. So I quote, "The wealthiest and most powerful in Europe, Australasia and North America have turned the myth to their advantage." What myth is he talking about? He's talking about the myth of St. George, as well as the myth of Robin Hood. More importantly, Robin Hood stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. And he's saying they've inverted it. In this version of Robin Hood, the traditional poor, the unemployed, the disabled, refugees have been put into the conceptual box where the rich used to be. It is they, the social category previously labelled poor, who are accused of living in big houses, wallowing in luxury and not needing to work, while those previously considered rich are redesigned as the ones, or redescribed, I think, as the ones who work terribly hard for fair reward or less, forced to support this new category of poor who are considered rich. In this version, the Sheriff of Nottingham runs a ruthless realm of plunder and political correctness, ransacking the homesteads of honest peasants for money to finance the conceptual rich. That is the unemployed. The conceptual rich now are the unemployed, the disabled, refugees, working class single mothers, dodgers, scroungers, chavs, chiselers, and cheats. In this version of the myth, Robin Hood is a tax cutter and a handout denouncer. He's a Jacob Rees-Mogg. He's a Nigel Farage. He's a Margaret Thatcher and a Ronald Reagan. He's winning elections. The left need to be unafraid of swallowing their own dejector and spraying it around like hungry dogs around our own political territories. I'll just rest again and generate my own for 1 second. And I have sort of, we've only got 10 minutes left, but I have quite quickly forgotten one of the important things that sort of brings these lectures together is the idea of inner alchemy. Alchemists have used urine over the years to generate gold, the philosopher's stone, but much more symbolically, the idea is that God is us and rests within us. Christian Hermeticism manages to combine Jesus as a symbolic figure, and also the fact that we can all be part of him and his heaven on earth. So, in terms of like a Vedic idea or a more Eastern interpretation of urine and inner alchemy, we come to the lower chakra of the Muladhara. I think I pronounced that okay. Muladhara is the chakra which rests in the pelvic floor. Pelvic floor rests between say like the vagina and the anus, or for men, of course, the testicles and the anus. So it's lower than low. It's quite hard to locate, especially for men. As I said in a previous lecture, I am a Pilates teacher, and the pelvic floor is really important for many sort of physical activities. And I found the pelvic floor, this lowest part, this bottom chakra, to be really useful in getting my clients to calm down. It's really hard to release your shoulders. It's always a problem in with upper back pain. It's really, really hard to actually know how to release from above, because you feel all this responsibility. So when you actually connect the lowest part of the torso, the other end of the oblong or the box, it's actually, in my experience, much easier to get clients engaged in unlearning bad posture. So the Muladhara, or the pelvic floor chakra, is often associated with worry. Again, why it's so difficult for me to help clients release from here. And shame. So what I often ask people to do, especially for men, it's much harder with men to do this. You say, imagine your team is about to score a goal. Or imagine you're stepping into an ice bath, and then you kind of zip up, and you manage to engage the rest of your body really fluidly. And when you really connect from the bottom chakra, or the lowest chakra, what's called the root chakra, Muladhara, you may feel an enormous distance relating from your ears, say your shoulders, to the body. In meditation, it's a task to deconstruct the body and reassemble it, and then you start to feel how enormous your own body is. And that brings me to the chakra in general, the wheels, the energy circles of the body. Chakra means wheels, and to the energy point, which helps us connect to the top. And the idea of using our fluids to connect to ourselves. The Ouroboros myth, the idea of a snake eating its own tail, is the idea potentially of not just sucking your own cock, of course. Quite literally is the idea. The mouth is the womb and the tail is the cock. Possible for women as well, all right? If we're attaining spiritual enlightenment, I'm becoming a woman, and a woman is becoming a man, and we're having that ultimate sort of intimate relationship with gender. But it's the idea of marrying the low with the high. The Ouroboros, I think, is a beautiful myth, so to continue this idea of self-generation. The alchemical idea that energy doesn't come from nothing, it's energy generates itself. The strange thing about energy is that the more you lose, the more you get, it seems. So a horrible situation of chronic fatigue syndrome is where you don't have enough energy to create energy. And when you do have energy, you go for a jog, you find you have more energy. It's quite a perverse idea, and you sort of need less sleep, so to speak. So again, for my third time, I'm going to have a little pause just to collect my thoughts. Thank you for your patience. The Ouroboros is described by the alchemical thinker, or the philosopher of alchemy, Aaron Cheek, as the origin that is ever present. The alchemical idea as well that our origins don't have a start. It's always within us. We're always able to drag heaven down from us, a bit like the roofs when we're pissing. It is not a beginning, since all beginning is linked with time. And the present is not just the now, today, the moment or a unit of time. It is ever originating, an achievement of full integration and continuous renewal. Anyone able to concretize, to realize the effect and reality of origin and the present in entirety, supersedes his beginning and end and the mere here and now. I hope this doesn't sound too abstract, because I would like to bring this down to drinking your own piss. But I think this glorious golden substance has been valued over and over again, not by people who want to clean wool in the early industrial revolution in England, but by many people wanting to seek their own spiritual enlightenment. There is mineral, there are nutrients within what we might usually consider the lowest of the low. And I think the lowbrow pornography, noise music, wrestling, skateboarding, graffiti. Actually, I fucking hate graffiti, but you know, you get my point. All of this can be elevated. It's the idea of anti-art, breaking, dissolving with our own acidic urine, the old constructs of art and art making. So, to finish today, I'll just bring it back. Again, I can't seem to stop quoting people. Maybe that's the idea of spraying around and splashing into all, being a very sort of horizontal way of thinking. Carl Jung. We haven't explicitly mentioned him yet. Carl Jung, Man and His Symbols, the champion of the collective unconscious. I'm going to link dreams with myth here because I think it's very much related in terms of urine and drinking it. He said, and quoting Carl Jung, the Talmud says the dream is its own interpretation. That's brilliant. Inbuilt within myth is its own sort of digestion and its own kind of filtration and evangelizing it as well. If there's one thing the left, one thing that radical Christians and mystics can do nowadays is reclaim evangelism, not from this dogmatic, homophobic, and so on association we've had recently. But just like the word orgy we had earlier, orgy really means to work together, working together. We can reinterpret this idea of urine as containing its own goodness. The dream is its own interpretation, boys and girls. So, sitting or standing, ladies and gentlemen, whether we're in Germany or not, why don't we enjoy ourselves a nice collective urination later on over there. Do make sure you have a look at the poster, and I will finish very shortly. We've got Heather Lyon's inauguration coming up, and which is all very exciting. Then 2 concerts, and come and talk to me and enjoy the tea over there. Thank you very much, boys and girls.
Thank you.